A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O,
From the ABCs to pomp and circumstance, it all happens so quickly, and we parents are there for our children. Hi, this is Sharon Marshall Lockett, your host on Home Sweet Homework. We've got a great program planned for you today. Professionally, I'm an educational staff developer. That means I train teachers. I'm also a mom. I was a single mom while my son was growing up, and he was such a terrible student. It used to embarrass me to tell his teachers what I do for a living. My son had been in kindergarten for 5 weeks, and already I had been invited to attend 4 parent conferences. One of them was to discuss the fact that he forged my signature in kindergarten on his homework assignment. In his neatest printing, in all capital letters, he signed it, Jeff's mom. Well, the good news is that today he is a college graduate. He's a very successful sociologist with the Regional Center helping handicapped children and adults. He's a devoted and loving husband. He's a wonderful son. We survived those trauma years, and you can too. In these weekly broadcasts, I'll share with you strategies that work. I know they work because I've helped thousands of students who were considered high risk and at potential of dropping out by the school system. I helped them not just pass their classes, but they graduated eligible for college. Professionally, I'm founder and director of a wonderful program called SCORE. SCORE is validated by the United States Department of Education for effectiveness in getting high-risk students, those students who were potential dropouts, turned on to learning, achieving in an academic classroom at a level of content mastery, and graduating eligible for the college or career of their choice. The validation by the U.S. Department of Education is a little bit like the educational equivalent of getting the Good Housekeeping seal of approval. When we look at what colleges want of entering freshmen, they want students who can read, write, think, and calculate at a level of content mastery and a rich curriculum. We'll look actually at that issue next week, but they define the reading, writing, thinking, calculating very specifically, very rigidly. When you look at what businesses want of entry-level employees, they want much the same thing. They want employees who can read, write, think, and calculate. They also want beginning employees who can communicate effectively and who can work on a team toward a goal. In my SCORE program, we looked at those 6 elements and designed a program around it so successful that when we evaluated our first graduating class, 40% of them graduated in the top 12.5% of their high school graduating class. Now, these strategies, those things we did with these students, the things we learned working with these students, are what I'll be sharing with you parents over the next few weeks. Periodically, we'll have guests on the show who have solved their own parenting and homework problems. We'll invite specialists to talk with you about reading and science projects and math and history. We'll hear from support professionals about the role of hearing, speech, and vision as it relates to homework and as it relates to learning. In short, we have a great season planned for you, so let's jump in. As parents, we never quite know when we're holding on too tight or when we're letting go too soon. We never quite know when we have to be tough and when we need to be tender. We never quite know when we should punish and when we should ignore their misbehavior. And nowhere is our dilemma more evident than as it relates to our children in the process of learning. We struggle with issues like when do we affirm their attempts at creativity and when do we demand that they improve the quality of their work? When should we talk to their teacher, and when would that be an invasion of their privacy? We never quite know whether they're being honest about their efforts and still performing poorly, or whether they've learned how to manipulate us so they postpone a well-deserved punishment. We never quite know why they seem to understand material but do poorly on their tests. Or sometimes why they do poorly on their coursework and ace the tests. We never quite know how to help them in the process of learning without assuming a responsibility that should be theirs. We don't know how to deal with a child who learns easily and must be prodded, while another sibling struggles to perform and needs encouragement. And they live together in the same household. Well, all of these issues we'll be taking a look at in the next few weeks, but I want to start you off with 3 pointers in this first session. Number 1 is make sure your children are at grade level every year. Number 2, I'm going to give you a no-fail, win-win reading tip. Reading is vital, especially grades kindergarten through 6. And then the third item I want to look at today is the fact that your child can learn, so if they're struggling, there's a reason. The first pointer I want to give you today is make sure your child is at grade level at the end of every school year. Wonderful child psychologist Dr. James Dobson says that if your child is not reading at grade level at the end of first grade, you should hire a tutor over the summer. I concur with that. There are a lot of other pointers I'll give you, such as having eyes checked, and we'll look at those in depth in a later broadcast. But right now I want just to remind you that reading is fundamental, reading is vital, and if your child is not at grade level at the end of first grade, that will affect your child for the rest of his or her life, and of course his or her educational career. So reading at grade level, beginning at kindergarten. Your teacher will have a word list, a word recognition list at the end of every grade level. Your teacher will also have a reading list with grade appropriate books for you to purchase or borrow or check out at the library. And read with your children. Make sure they're at grade level at the end of every year. I had one parent say to me who's had a high school son struggling and appeared to be almost retarded. He said to me, we had him tested and he was average. Now, this child could carry on an intelligent conversation with me, so I knew that he had what it took to learn. So I said to the parent, he has good intelligence. He just is a poor reader. They didn't know how to work with him at the reading level when he was in primary grades, and that will follow your children throughout their lives. So make sure at the end of first grade they're at grade level or above, at second grade at or above grade level, at third grade at or above grade level, especially in those primary grades, and especially in those grade levels at reading. Learning does have something to do with readiness, and learning to read has to do with readiness. So a lot of the pre-reading activities that we'll look at in a later broadcast will help develop that reading readiness. Now, another one of those conferences I had with Jeff's kindergarten teacher dealt with just that issue of reading. Actually, it dealt with the fact that he wasn't paying any attention to her. It was like when she talked, he looked off in another direction. He was off in his own little dream world. Much of his childhood, I think, was spent that way. Well, I visited one day, and she kept talking about how bright my son was. I had been through a terrible trauma in my life at that stage, and I said to her, you keep referring to him as bright, and I've never cared if he was bright. I want my son to be happy. I want him to have a good life. She said, well, I don't know what he knew when he enrolled in kindergarten. I said, well, I do. He knew all of his alphabet, but none of his sounds, because I tried to teach him A, C, 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 and he didn't seem to want to learn. So I figured he wasn't ready. She looked at me and laughed, and she said, then your child is not bright. Your child is brilliant, because he has ignored every word I've said during this school year, and he knows every one of them now. Then all of a sudden the lights shined in her eyes and she said, maybe this is my problem, not his. Come back tomorrow and let's see what we have to show you. When I returned the next day for the parent conference, she said to my son, Jeff, show your mother what you learned in school today. And Jeff proceeded to read to me, word for word, very well, the entire first grade pre-primer. He was in a K1 combination class. He was a little bit above the class average. He already knew what she was trying to teach to the kindergartners, so he was bored. So he compensated for his boredom by looking around the room and ignoring. And when she taught first grade, instead of doing his kindergarten work, he was listening in to what they were learning. I'm very grateful that his kindergarten teacher was experienced, that when she recognized the problem, she was willing to accommodate to help Jeff through it. From that point on, she put Jeff in the first grade reading class and left him in the kindergarten class for all of his other activities. By the way, Jeff's preschool recommended that he not go to kindergarten because he was such a pill during their activities. I thought about it and realized he had to go somewhere, and repeating preschool didn't seem to make sense. And looking at him and his skills, I thought he could be 18 and he wouldn't like color cut and paste. So I sent him to kindergarten instead. Looking back, I'm certainly glad I did, because he was ready to learn to read. He wouldn't have learned that at preschool. So I want to urge you to listen to that little voice inside and trust your gut where your children are concerned. So again, I can't say it enough, but reading is vital. Make sure they're at grade level for every grade. Get the reading list and the word list from their teachers and work with your children on it. I've been talking so much about kindergarten, first and second grade, but I want to assure you that these skills are foundational. Most of my work was actually done with high school students, and much of what I had to do with those students we considered at risk was to go back and remediate, to take care of those things that they had never learned in elementary school. In fact, one year I opened what we call a Title I lab in middle school. Title I are those students who score in the bottom quartile of our national exams. This Title I placement qualifies them for special help to accelerate their achievement. So I opened a Title I English lab for 7th graders one year, and I inherited all the children who had not made it, had not mastered reading. And in many cases, they hadn't even mastered speaking before they got into 7th grade. Well, needless to say, in 7th grade, they were lost. They were failing. They were actually driving their teachers crazy. They rotated in for a 2-week period in my lab. And during that 2 weeks, I was to accelerate them, to accelerate their achievement, and then send them back into the classroom ready to participate. Imagine my surprise when I discovered that 7th graders could not speak a complete sentence. They couldn't recognize a complete sentence. Many of them didn't even know the alphabet. Fortunately, I had a lot of tools at my disposal. I had overhead projectors. I had different things they could work with. I could accelerate them. In schools, accelerating means growing more than a year in a year. So anytime a student is not at grade level, the schools are frantically searching for a way to help them accelerate. One tool for acceleration, one thing I offer you, my next pointer of the day, is a reading tool called choral reading. Choral reading means you read the same thing aloud together. Now, I don't care what you read, as long as you read, it should be something that your children will enjoy, something that is grade level appropriate or their level appropriate, which means they may struggle over 1 or 2 words, but basically they can read it successfully. If they're good readers, they'll enjoy reading to you. If they're good readers, they'll enjoy having you read to them. If they're struggling readers, they need you sometimes to read to them, but they also desperately need choral reading to be a part of their daily routine. Choral reading will help them decode the words. If they're reading to you and they find a word they can't pronounce, they struggle to decode it, and then they get nervous and their body actually shuts down rather than them decoding the word. They get embarrassed, which means they get angry. Angry is the behavior from embarrassment. When you choral read, you see and say exactly the same thing together. That way, if they struggle decoding a word, they can hear it as they see it and attempt to say it. Work at a comfortable pace for them, which means it'll probably be a little bit slow for you. Now, the parents in my program commit to choral reading with their children 15 minutes a day, every day. I promise you that if you do simply choral reading and nothing else, both your children's speed and their comprehension will improve noticeably within 30 days. If they still are struggling to read at the end of 30 days, then something is going on with their vision or with their hearing, something else, and we'll discuss that in depth in a later broadcast. But the first step is choral reading. Choral reading helps your children reach what we call automaticity. Now, automaticity means they reach the point in reading where they can decode words intuitively. That way, the process of decoding, of figuring out how to sound out a word, doesn't detract from understanding what they're reading. If they look at the word turkey and have to decode it, they would do turkey. That process, it takes so much energy to figure out the TUR sound that they don't hear themselves and they don't gain flow. So with you choral reading beside them, when they see it and struggle, they hear you say turkey. They get the point of decoding and they can comprehend while they're at it. And of course, over time, they decode quicker. They'll be decoding 3 to 4 words a minute when they reach automaticity. That way their reading rate when they get into high school will be in the neighborhood of 200 words a minute. You don't have to worry about that. Their teachers will. But you do need, as parents, to worry about whether or not they're able to decode words, whether they're seeing and hearing the sound, and whether they're decoding at a rate that the process of reading doesn't detract from what they want to understand while they read. Now, I know this sounds too simple to work, but I want to promise you that sometimes the simplest things are the ones that actually work the best. So point number 2, choral read with your children every day, 15 minutes a day, and in 30 days you will see a noticeable difference in the way they read, in the way they decode words, in both their speed and in their comprehension of what they read. It's a win-win. So together we've looked at make sure they're at grade level and then use that great tool called choral reading. Now I want to get into your great fears. You know, parenting is tough. We try to help our children and then they forget or they fight us or they try but don't succeed and we feel insecure. We've done all we know to do and then we kind of have that nagging doubt of maybe they have a problem. And we hate ourselves for thinking that way, so we shove those thoughts into our subconscious where they fester and periodically erupt. When they erupt, when we have those terrible times, we talk to teachers, we talk to friends, we talk to doctors, we talk to therapists, and we're rigorous, but often to no avail. I can't tell you how long I searched with my own son to find the root of the problems he was having in school. We worry about what lessons they'll have to learn because they're so stubborn and decide it must be their fault, and then it happens again, and we see teachers and friends and doctors and therapists, and again, to no avail so often. We feel powerless, and when we use wrong approaches, our children think homework is punitive, and when we show our frustration, our children somehow realize we're frustrated and figure out how to manipulate us. When we imply they must not be trying, We make them feel stupid, which results in lowered self-esteem, which in turn results in their further inability to learn. So it is time to break that cycle, and I want to tell you something loudly and clearly. Your child can learn. Your child has the intelligence it will take. If your child is not learning, something is going on. There is a cause. There is a reason. There are hundreds of possible reasons. And until you find what we call root cause, you'll simply be band-aiding. Now, band-aids are good. Band-aids are necessary. They're just not enough. So we seek root cause. We seek what is really underneath the problem they're having with learning. And sometimes it's an intellectual issue, but it's never that they lack intelligence. Any child who can carry on a conversation with you has already proven that they have all the intelligence they need to read, write, speak, and think. So it's a matter of finding the right tools to make that happen. Know that they are smart enough to learn. Know that at a deep, deep level, so you'll keep looking for solutions rather than facing your fears. By the way, learning to speak is one of the toughest things your children will ever have to do, and you've already taught them how to speak. You were good at that. So I want to go back to those strategies you used when they made their first little incomprehensible sound. You were so excited, and you would say, Mama, Mama, and they would mouth something that had a little mama, and you would cheer and say, look, they said Mama. Well, you want to do that in their schoolwork. You want to keep that enthusiasm. You want to keep that encouragement going. And you want to honor their honest, struggling efforts in every area. So if it could be an intellectual problem, and it's not that they lack intelligence, what would an intellectual problem be? Well, that could be a mismatch between the way they learn and the way the teacher teaches. For example, they may learn better by listening, and their teacher may have them read a lot. So reading and listening are two very different skills. They may need to do something in order to learn it. And so action would drive these children, and school sometimes is a sit still and listen effort. So look at a mismatch of, do they learn one way but the teacher teaches another, and then how to compensate for it. And again, we will spend an entire broadcast at a later date dealing with compensating and the various ways that we learn. There may also be a mismatch between the way the teacher teaches and the way the teacher tests. Sometimes, for example, a teacher will teach and do the coursework on practical items and practical application, and then will give the test that the textbook prints, which is very much based on reading for detail in the textbook. So the children will learn one way and be tested another, and sometimes that's confusing to them. It takes them a while to learn to figure out the testing strategy in any given classroom. There may also be, in the area of intelligence, they may be using poor study skills. Now, study skills is the way they go about attacking something. We'll devote an entire session to the issue of memory. But in a nutshell, there are strategies and specific tools you use when you're trying to commit something to memory. And when I interviewed a lot of high schoolers, the most structured tool they had for memorizing something was to read through it 2 or 3 times. Well, that isn't memory. That's reading, and it may be comprehension, but it's not memory. So there may be study skills that they need. I had a friend who went to her son's teacher and said, he reads, but he doesn't seem to understand it. And the teacher said, well, what he needs is study skills. I'll send him home a study skills sheet. The sheet basically said, read it, and if he doesn't understand it, read it again. Well, big help that was. No, there are some great tools to help your children learn, to help them memorize, to help them read. And we will devote weekly sessions dealing with just those issues. Well, root cause can also be emotional. Has there been something going on in your lives recently? And if so, it will affect classwork. If your children leave in the morning frustrated and angry at you, it will show up in their schoolwork. If they are in a classroom where there's a conflict with the teacher and they're angry, it will show up with their schoolwork. If they're being teased or bullied by their peers, it will show up in their classwork. Our children are very fragile in areas like that and desperately need our help. Another root cause might be physical. There could be something with their vision or something with their hearing or something with their speech. There could be food allergies. There could be a blood sugar level. High blood sugar inhibits learning. Low blood sugar inhibits learning. So if they're not getting a nutritious breakfast, it can affect their learning. So a lot of physical causes, and we'll devote an entire broadcast to dealing with the physical issues, probably several because that's such a big one. And then it also can be a spiritual cause. Spiritual is our dreams, our goals, and our values. We're not all religious, but we are all spiritual. And when our children say things like, I want to be a doctor, and we say, well, then you'd better get your act together, we've actually robbed them of a dream. We will spend some time talking about that in a later broadcast. But for now, here, your children can learn. If they are not learning, there is a reason. There are hundreds of possible reasons, but they all have a root cause, and finding that root cause will literally change their lives. One of my gurus is a wonderful man named Harvey Williams. Harvey Williams is a black man who grew up in the South many years ago. At age 9, he was accosted by the Ku Klux Klan, and he and his family fled for their lives on a little wagon with everything they owned. Harvey, at age 9, sat on the back of the wagon with a shotgun, instructed to shoot anyone who came after them. Harvey started school at age 13. Harvey failed algebra 3 times. Harvey today holds 3 PhDs and recently retired from the University of California, Irvine as director of admissions to their medical school. He is an amazing man. One day I sat down with Harvey and said to Harvey, when do you tell children they're not going to make it? When do you tell them to give up on their dream and to pursue another avenue? Harvey, without having to think about it, said to me, you never have that right. You always tell them what it will take to get what they want. The choice is always theirs. We'll spend a whole session later dealing with helping your children achieve their dreams. It's very powerful, but for now, no. Make sure they're at grade level. Make sure their reading is up to speed. Choral read with them. And know, without a doubt, that they can do it. If they're not achieving, there is a reason. Reasons are myriad, but there is always a reason, and we can help them through. Well, one of the toughest things about homework is the feeling that no one else has ever had the problems you have. And although I was an educator, there were times when my son's teachers and counselors intimidated me. If you have specific questions, if you want email partners, consider joining our Home Sweet Homework subscription series. There you'll have unlimited internet access to answer typical questions, and you'll have access to our team of educators who will answer your personal questions. Visit our website, homesweethomework.com, add your name to our mailing list, and you'll instantly receive our little flyer called Follow the College Prep Road that tells you what to do at every grade level from kindergarten through high school to make sure your children are prepared and ready for college. That's yours instantly free. And you'll have an opportunity to sign up for our subscription series. Next week, we'll take an in-depth look at the fact that college begins in kindergarten. I'll be sharing milestones your child should reach during each segment of education. Milestones that will ensure that they have the future of their dreams. Join us next week, and until then, remember, even a kindergartner remembers the song Pomp and Circumstance. Give your children roots, teach them to fly, and give them wings. This is Sharon Marshall Lockett, HomesweetHomework.com. Thank you for joining us.